Okay, so here am I with Miles. Everybody know who Miles is? Put your hands up if you play Football Manager. That's okay, that's quite a lot, actually.
Cool.
The rest of you didn't put your hand up. Do you know, at least know what it is? Yeah? Football Manager, a bit clue in the name. So Miles Jacobson, full disclosure, he used to be my boss, so a bit daunting. And I have to say, I absolutely love your T-shirt, Metal Mickey. Everyone remember that?
Some of the people here definitely too young for that, and also I don't know whether it was popular in the UK and the US or
mostly the UK. Yeah. Speaking of age, tell me, I want to know more about you, where you came from, where did you grow up, what year were you born? I know because I got your wiki page.
I was born in 1971, so I'm proper old. I grew up in a place called Carpenter's Park, just outside Watford.
Hence the Watford Fs. Yeah.
Hence the Watford supporter. Well, you're meant to support your local club there, but there are a lot of Arsenal, Tottenham, and Glory Hunter type football supporters. But I grew up there and didn't really enjoy school much. So I was very musical when I was at school. So I used to sing a lot and play a lot of instruments.
Musical?
Yeah, I've sung at the Royal Opera House and the Albert Hall and Festival Hall.
Okay.
And then my balls dropped.
Any videos of this? Because I'm traveling.
Thankfully, no. It was in the days before video cameras, so I think I'm safe on that score. And started working when I was 15, flipping burgers. I was still kind of going to school at the time, but I was more interested in working. And flipped burgers and had a lot of fun doing that, and then got made redundant because worked at a place called Quick Burger, which if anyone here is French or Belgian, they'll know well because it's still just about there. But we got bought out by Burger King, and I got made redundant. My first taste of redundancy, first and only actual taste of redundancy. Went and spent my redundancy money in a record shop, and got offered a job at the record shop because the records that I was buying, other people also were interested in, but the people who ran the shop weren't interested in. And that bizarrely started my career in the music industry rather than games, but that led to games industry.
Yeah, I know you were an A&R man, but I've never really known what that is.
An A&R man is, well, an A&R person is someone who goes to gigs, finds bands, or that this is what it was like when I was doing it, finds bands, signs the band as early as they possibly can, and then helps develop the band's career. So they're effectively the manager, but working for a record company or a publishing company. The band have their own manager looking after their affairs. So you're steering bands in the right direction, putting them with producers, getting them onto films, getting them onto games, and trying to earn them as much money as possible. But the role's changed a lot now. It used to be that I could go and see a band in Stoke on a Tuesday night and try and sign them the next day. Nowadays, everyone needs to see that their social media stats are looking good, and they have to have been out there and done a lot more work at an earlier stage.
What spooky was that?
It's fine.
It's fine.
We'll give the computer a mic if you want, if it's interesting.
I thought you were echoing there for some reason. Yeah, okay, so that's, I can see the progression there from sort of a music, I mean, you worked in the music store or?
Yeah, so I used to buy a lot of the records that we would then sell to people.
Oh, okay, so I thought you meant you were buying them yourself. You were buying them for the store then?
I was buying them for the store, yeah. So a lot of the alternative stuff from the 80s, so bands like Nirvana and Carter the Unstoppable Sex Machine, if people remember them. But when I was there, I realised that I could actually get into concerts for free. So I used to go to a lot of concerts, and then I realised that when I was getting into concerts for free, I could actually go backstage and meet the bands. So I was going and doing that with, much like you have there, but with a slightly older school recording device, and I'd just go and interview the bands, and then typed it up on my Atari ST, and got someone to print it as a little magazine, which I then went round selling at concerts and often from behind the T-shirt stalls. So I sold T-shirts for quite a lot of bands as well. And off the back of that, there's a guy called Steve Lemack, who at the time was live reviews editor at the NME. He's now on Six Music. And Steve used to buy my fanzine and trace me down to the record store phoned me up and said, "Do you want to write for the NME?"
Wow.
And I went, "Yeah, all right." So I would go to Steve with lots of gigs, and he was basically training me how to write for the NME. I was doing gig reviews, one of which got published. I think the others were mock reviews that he'd come back with feedback on. And I took him to see a bunch of bands at very early stages. And one night we were in a pub called the Bull and Gate in Kentish Town, which is now a restaurant, but used to be a great music venue. And Steve introduced me to a guy at Food Records, which they had a band called Jesus-Jones at the time, who'd just been #1 in America, and I knew the keyboard player from Jesus-Jones because he worked in our price in Watford in another record store. He used to come and buy records from us. And they had a band called Diesel Park West and managed a band called Voice of the Beehive. And they just signed a band called Seymour, who became Blur. It became known as Blur. And Steve introduced me to Andy and said, "This is Miles, he's got a really good pair of ears, but his writing's shit, you should give him a job." And Andy gave me a job a few days later, and I started working there. It was just as the first Blur album was coming out. And Blur went on to do pretty well, so I worked with a few other bands there.
I think I've heard of them.
Worked with a band called Shampoo, who were huge in Japan, a band called Dubstar, a band called the Blue Tones, various other bands. And whilst I was there, I was shopping a Jesus-Jones game around to games publishers, because I was a massive gamer from the ZX80 days, and used to do a bit of coding back in the day on the 8081 Spectrum, not now. But
you were a coder as well?
Only in BASIC, Byron, and nothing good.
Yeah, that's not coding.
Yeah, exactly, it's not really coding. It's a bit like using Unity now.
Ooh. Josh, do you want to say anything here?
Well, Unity makes it a lot easier, and BASIC made it a lot easier as well. Unity's a great tool, and we are using it as a studio for some of our products.
An SI?
Yeah, well, we have our own tools that we're using for our main games, but we've just done a game jam for War Child that we've used Unity, and we've actually got a product, and I'm using that word very carefully because I hate that word, but it's not a game. So we've got a product coming out in a couple of weeks, which is also Unity, that they probably don't know about, because do you? Excellent. Okay, cool. Sega found out about it last Thursday, and we're releasing it just before the World Cup. So, so we've kept this one pretty secret so far. But I was shopping Jesus-Jones around because they'd just been #1 in America to games companies. We came up with this concept of doing a skateboarding platform game where the different characters from the band would be the skateboarders with 8-bit versions of all their songs. And for some reason, no one was interested. But I became friends with a couple of the guys at Domark who claimed to be interested. And they were interested because they wanted to go and see Blur play. So I swapped 2 tickets to see Blur play for me to be a tester on Championship Manager 2.
Is that where the linkage from?
That's where the link came from.
Is that where you met the brothers?
So I met the brothers. I didn't meet the brothers for a couple of years. So I used to fax through feedback to the brothers, which they still have, because the 3 of us are real hoarders.
Maybe we should tell people who they are before they don't know who they are.
So the brothers are Oliver and Paul Collier, who are the Collier brothers, who started Sports Interactive, started Football Manager when they were still at school. Originally the game was called European Champions, and then Domark rebranded it Championship Manager and trademarked the brand, which is why we're now called Football Manager, having left Eidos many years ago. And Ov and Paul are still at the studio, programming on the game. Ov works on the technology side of things. Paul heads up the match engine programming team. So very much still around. Yeah, still doing it.
Yeah. Paul used to sit directly behind me when I was coding on the 3D engine there. Amazing person.
He is. You know, the guy's a genius, although in fact it's better now not to go out online because he might watch it and hear me saying that, and that will cause problems. Because he'll use it against me in the future. But no, he is a genius. I mean, our match engine when you're making a football game, there's different ways to approach it, and something like FIFA, which is a great arcade football game, concentrates more on the attacking play rather than the full simulation. So if you played a 90-minute version of FIFA, you're going to get a scoreline of 2018 or something like that. With us, you can watch the full 90-minute simulation and have the realistic scoreline. And the reason for that is the amount that we simulate inside the game. So we're taking time splices every 1/4 of a second, but we've also got offbeats as well. So every player on the pitch is making a decision every 1/4 of the second, whether they're on the ball or off the ball. And there are thousands of decisions that they're making that every 1/4 of a second. So it's pretty complicated stuff.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I've seen the code.
It's quite scary, isn't it? The code's a bit like spaghetti. It's just all over the place, but it works.
It works, and it works really well. I mean, you just see it playing out in front of you when we're doing the 3D engine. It was just, how are you doing that? I never did find out, to be honest with you.
But I'm not sure anyone would be able to tell you that, because the problem with secret source is that people trial and error along the way, and unless you document absolutely everything that you're doing every single time you're doing it, there is going to be some secret source that no one really understands, and that is partly the case with our match engine. There are areas that people just look at and go, but how does it work? And the answer is, we don't know, but it does. So let's just keep it.
So the secret's out. Okay. But anyway, how do you, I mean, you've gone from A&R into meeting the brothers and working, I mean, you're testing the game at this point, aren't you? How did you progress from that to actually becoming the boss of it?
Well, I was testing the game, then I was doing a lot of the research for the game, and worked on setting up the research team. I used to head up the UK research. And I became more involved because one day we met up in the pub and Ov and Paul gave me a copy of their contract and said, so you rip bands off for a living? And I started arguing, going, no, I don't. Paul was in a band as well, who I'd demoed. He was in a band called Elevate.
Paul?
Yeah, Paul was a bass player in a band. Okay. Who were pretty good. They sounded a bit like The Fall. They're worth checking out. So they asked me to look at their contract, and I had a look at it and went, I'm not going to say what was in it, but just basically said this is the worst contract I've ever seen in my whole entire life. And went in to renegotiate it and found them a lawyer that wasn't a property lawyer. Found them a games industry lawyer.
When was this? What year?
You know, years all blur into one, Byron, but it's probably 94, 95, so something
really
like
early,
that.
And games lawyers back then must have been very few and far.
No, yeah. there were some good technology lawyers out there that you could use. So we looked at the contract and went in and renegotiated it and got them a much better deal. And off the back of that, because Paul was used to being in a band, they turned around and said, well, will you become our manager? So I did, and I did that on the side of all of the music industry stuff that I was doing. And then we started growing the studio because Ov and Paul would admit they're not business people, they're programmers, that's what they like to do. So the studio hadn't really grown in the way that it could have done, and there were a lot of decisions being made by Domark that should have been being made by the studio. For example, I took on a PR company called Bastion to do PR for the brothers, and it was the first time, or we were told that it was the first time that a development studio had taken on their own PR. But we approached everything as though we were a band rather than people making computer games, because that's what we knew. And I learnt a lot more about the games industry over the years. I learnt that for those of you who know anything about the music industry, there's a very famous manager called Peter Mensch who likes to slam his fist down on the table a lot, and I'd kind of taken a bit of inspiration from him, which didn't work as well in the games industry as it works in the music industry. The publishers tend to have a lot, or at that point the publishers had a lot more control. They were in control of absolutely everything. So we were being little upstarts, and I'd turn up at ECTS and I'd turn up at E3, and they would, what are you doing here? You're not meant to be here, you're a developer. And it's like, well, Yeah. And over the years, the role just grew and the studio grew, and we became, I think we're about 30 people when I was still part-time. So, and at that point, I was working for Universal Music. I'd moved from Food to Universal, and I was working with Fatboy Slim and Feeder, a band called Biss, who, a bit like Shampoo, sold a lot of records in Japan, and was helping out on a load of other bands, as well as looking after the whole catalogue for video game licensing. So I think Kish is here. I worked on the first Gran Turismo game where we got a copy of the game from Japan, and it was this bizarre acid jazz soundtrack that didn't make you want to drive fast. It actually made me want to turn the volume down. So we replaced all the music in Gran Turismo with bands that I was working with, like Feeder, and various other bands that would make you want to drive faster, basically. And worked on a bunch of games for Sony, and worked on some for EA and BMG Interactive, who later became Rockstar, although I don't think they'd like to admit at making the Three Lions football video game. So I was doing all of that as well as full-time A&R guy, and working with Fatboy Slim and business manager for Oven Paul and the studio. And it was just decided by them. They called me one day. I was actually away doing PR for them. I'd taken a week off work to go and do PR on the game. Was in Italy and had a phone call from them just going, can we just call you MD now? And I was like, yeah, but I'm not moving across to the studio. So I was MD of the studio for 2 years while still having other jobs. And then it got even busier when we were around 30 people. So I stopped doing the other stuff and went full time at that point.
So it was just so busy, that was the final decision, was it? Or?
Yeah, and I'd been doing some creative stuff anyway, but at that point, we didn't even have producers in the studio. There was a lot of stuff that I was doing and a lot of stuff that some of the senior programmers were doing. So Mark Vaughan was doing a lot of production stuff, and everyone was just chipping in. And it was at that point that we decided to grow up a little bit as a studio and be a bit more professional.
Because when I knew you back in 2009, I think I worked there.
Yeah,
you were very hands-on into the game development. You weren't just somebody sitting in the background doing the business. You were there day to day, actually involved with us, involved with the decisions in the code and in decisions in design. When did that actually start happening?
It was a very organic thing. When I moved into the studio, we just weren't organised, and we were making this huge, in-depth simulation with no documentation, and all very much flying by the seat of our pants. And we had to get organised. I mean, Champman 4 was not a fun development cycle. So that game was 6 months late. It should have been a year late. Came out far too early. The archetypal case of promises being made to the press that weren't achievable, not by us, has to be said. So we were getting 9 and 10 out of 10 reviews for a game that was literally full of bugs. And at that point, we just realised that we needed to be more organised. So a couple of people became producers. I was doing a lot of those tasks. And because the game was as big as it was, and we didn't have any designers in the studio at all, and we didn't have anyone heading up any element of design or ownership, I looked at different models and what worked, and we ended up going with a director model, which is more really the way that it works in Japan than the way that it works here, of having someone who makes all the decisions about what goes in but doesn't actually necessarily design every little part. So the programmers at the studio are still able to design their own modules, and they work very closely with QA, but it all comes to me for sign-off. So yes, I'm very involved on the day-to-day, and there is nothing that goes into the game without me saying yes, but I'm not involved in every single decision of how it gets to that point. And certainly I would never tell a programmer how to code, because the coders are the talent in the studio, and that's the same with any studio. The coders and the artists and the animators are the talent. I just try to hold it all together and make sure that we have a plan. And we now have, so Mark Vaughan directs Football Manager Mobile. I exec produce that, so literally Vaughanie gives me a feature set once a year, and I might argue about one of them, and the rest is all fine. And with Football Manager Touch, Collier decides what features go from Football Manager into Football Manager Touch. And the new product that comes out in a couple of weeks, which isn't a game, came about with one of our producers and one of our biz dev guys having a chat about something, and came up with a concept and actually did a lot of it behind my back. And presented it to me, and it was awesome because they presented me something really good. So that's always good. But we've grown a lot now as a studio. We're 115 people. We've just hired a chief operating officer, Matt Carroll from Disney, and it's incredible having him on board. Putting in proper HR practices. So, I know, it's weird. It's 2018, and apparently you have to do that stuff.
Yeah.
We've just moved office as well to Stratford, so we're in the old Olympic Media and Broadcast Centre, which is great. And whilst I'm still hands-on, there are certain roles that I am giving up. So I'm not doing everyone's pay rises anymore.
Pay rises, I remember those.
Pay rises, well, if you'd been there for long enough, Byron, you would have noticed that. And you were with us for what, 2 years?
Something like that, yeah.
So the average tenure at the studio now is 8.5 years.
Yeah, it was a long time.
And seeing as we only really started expanding properly about 10 years ago, that's pretty good. So, so yes, we do pay rise. We do bonuses as well. How about that?
I will say that the bonuses were pretty good. I remember those.
I'm about to do my final round of bonuses. Matt takes those over next year as well. So it's nice being able to give up some of the day-to-day stuff. But
talking of which, now and where we're running out of time, I want to touch into your charity work as well, because you do a lot of it, don't you? Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about War Child, Games Aid, things like that?
Well, I was a co-founder of Games Aid, along with Andy Payne in Livingston, Rupert Lohman, Andrew from Relentless. And we set it up because there wasn't at that point a good mechanic for people in the games industry to have a central place for to be able to raise funds. And we have a great voting mechanic on that, where people are able to they can vote on which charities it's going to go to. So they nominate charities, and all the money that's raised in the year goes into a big pot. And it's exploded now. I mean, the work that's been done, because we were only allowed to be trustees for 3 years initially, and then we had to step down. The work that's been done there is absolutely phenomenal. They even got you doing comedy the other week.
Yeah, there may be a trustee as well. I'm not too sure.
No, I think that's a good thing. That's definitely a good thing. So we work with them. We work with War Child as well very closely. War Child get a donation for every game that we sell. And that came about when we split from Eidos and ended up signing with Sega. We had 4 identical offers on the table. Everyone had accepted our terms. And it's very difficult deciding who you're going to go with. So I just threw a grenade in there of we want to give a donation to a charity of our choice for every game that we sell out of your cut. And the first person to fax us back saying yes was Sega. So that's why we signed with Sega.
Awesome.
Which is very cool. And I work with a few others as well. We advertise quite a few charities in the game. I think it's really important if you get to a position in life where you've actually got a voice and people listen to you, to do some good with that.
I agree.
So we're all so lucky in the West. The fact that we've even got smartphones means that we're rich compared to a lot of other parts of the world. So I've been fortunate enough to go and visit. I went to DRC with War Child, so I was in a war zone for 7 days. That was kind of my last proper holiday.
A holiday in the war zone?
Was doing that. I'm meant to be going to CAR later this year, which again should be good. So I'm very lucky that I get to do things like that and get to do lots of stuff in football as well. I mean, our research is... We've got 1,300 scouts around the world, and football clubs now buy data from us, which is quite odd. But off the back of that, I'm now involved with a few football services businesses, and I'm involved at Watford as well, which is my hometown club, which is also pretty damn special. Although having to wear a suit for football is weird, because I don't have to wear a suit for work.
I can't, well, talking of suits, actually, I was trying to picture you in a suit, and there's one thing that comes to mind is when you awarded an OBE. What did you wear then?
I wore a suit. I wore the same suit. So I had to buy a suit because I got asked to present a BAFTA. So I wore a suit for that, and then wore the same suit when I went to the Palace.
So what was that like? What's that experience like when you an OBE? I should be calling you Sir now, by the way.
No. Sir is KBE.
Okay.
Haven't got one of those yet. Who knows what will happen in the future? It'd be lovely to have another day out at the Palace, because I didn't really enjoy it. I didn't spend that much time enjoying it. I tend to be quite organised. As you'll know from working with me, I'm quite straight down the line and honest about things. So I took my mum and my sister with me, and I told them to sit right at the back. I told them exactly where to sit, because I'd been to see someone picking up an MBE before, and I knew how bad the queue was for the photographers afterwards. So my mum and sister sat at the back so that they were the first out. So I had my photo taken within 10 minutes of being out, and then I went off to a meeting and gave them some money to go to lunch. So might enjoy it more if I get another one. But no, it was good. Had a little chat with Chucky, who
Chucky
tried to swap some copies of Football Manager for some Dutchy original shortbread biscuits. He wasn't up for the trade, unfortunately. But I mean, the whole thing's a bit odd, isn't it? A guy from a dodgy part of Watford who has basically had fun for his whole life and called it work, getting a medal for it.
No, I disagree. I mean, I see the kind of impact you had on the games through the work you do around it, so I think it's well deserved. I mean, everybody else agree?
Thank you.
Yeah. Come on, say yes, everybody. Back me up here. Good.
I think it's more deserved than the medals Muttley used to get in wacky races, but not much more.
Hi.
Hello.
I'm a huge fan of Football Manager since I rediscovered it in 2016.
Excellent.
But I found with the UI, this is a question about UI, I hope it's not too detailed. I found the UI create a bit of a barrier for me to learn how to play. There's so much data. And it's cool how complex and how detailed I can get with it. But as a new user coming to it, I found that really difficult. And speaking as an art director, I feel like the UI breaks a lot of traditional graphic design rules and things like that. Is that something that you agree with, or is it something that you don't feel is important for your users, or what's going on?
So we absolutely do break lots of graphic design rules, because the amount of data that we've got on each page breaks every graphics design rule under the sun.
Yeah.
We get car companies coming to us asking for help with the UI in cars because they've got so much data that they're not showing to people. I agree with you that it can be overwhelming sometimes, and we've never successfully nailed a tutorial. Plus, people don't like clicking on tutorials anyway. Yeah. But it's one of the reasons why we now have 3 different games. So we've got Football Manager Mobile, Football Manager Touch, and Football Manager. Football Manager is the flight simulator version, if you like. Okay. And then Football Manager Mobile is a little bit more Wipeout. So you can start off with that, or start off with Touch and then move into the full game. I'd love to say that we've nailed the tutorial, but we haven't historically. We will continue trying. And considering we're releasing in Germany this time for the first year, we're going to have a big influx of new users, so it's something we absolutely have to get right. But there's a constant battle in the studio between graphic design, UI, and what we need to be presenting for the immersion in the game. And the graphic design side of things often loses out, because you have to, from a usability perspective, you want to try and have things on as few screens as possible. Otherwise, there are screens inside the game that we know people have never visited because we track it.
I can vouch for that.
That data is really important, right? But it's too hidden away. So it's something we spend a lot of time on and a lot of thought on. We've got a large UI team, as Byron will attest to. We have a specific UI producer, which most studios don't have. So it's something we're mindful of, but with the amount of data that's there, I think when people from a design background, from a graphic design background, come in and see just how much data we are displaying, they're kind of blown away by how much we're trying to get there. But it's a tightrope we're constantly walking.
Thank you. First of all, I wanted to thank you for actually getting me my first job in games industry. So
Cool.
I worked on Championship Manager back in the day when it was still on IDOS.
Excellent.
I worked on it for 2 days. It was supposed to be localized in Finnish, but the system just didn't support Finnish language, obviously. So I had to cancel my own job and ended up being a QA tester for IO Interactive. So thanks for letting me into the industry.
That's cool.
Kind of indirectly. Also, I have a big interest in music, and I wanted to just get an idea from you. Like, how do you see the future of music and games being integrated, as they're both extremely important entertainment industries? And obviously, you're talking about licensing established bands into games. Now we are starting to see artists breaking through from soundtracks, like Carpenter Brut from Hotline Miami soundtrack. He's actually making pretty good money as an independent artist. What's going to be next? How are those two industries going to be integrated?
So from a Football Manager perspective, they're not going to be. But with games with stories, I do think the music is often an oversight. And I think that's a really big mistake. If you look at something like God of War, one of the reasons why that game works so well is because of the emotion that is driven by the music that's in there. And films have been doing this for years and years and years. And some games do it. The AAA titles do it. But a lot of other games don't and are ignoring it a little bit. And it is so important. Music sets the mood for everything in your life. So why wouldn't you be using the same stuff to happen inside games? You know, people spend months deciding what their first dance is going to be at their wedding. They spend the same amount of time about what they're going to come down the aisle to. They do the same when they're putting together a video of their child's first step. They choose the music that goes on behind it. All of those kinds of things people are doing on a day-to-day basis, but music is still an afterthought for games, which it isn't for film. If you look at Baby Driver as the best example of a film using music and audio, without the music there, it's not the same film. And having worked on that side of things, of placing music in stuff, I actually saw Trainspotting, the film Trainspotting, where every single track was by the band Madness. And the film has a completely different effect than it does with the real music in there. So it should be taken more seriously, in my opinion. And it's only a matter of time before people are able to spend the money on doing it properly, or before musicians actually take that jump of stopping being freelance and trying to be rock stars and join game studios, because people used to do that. And if you look back at the early days of Psygnosis, Tim Wright, who was also known as Cold Storage, he worked for Psygnosis and he would put together soundtracks as well as be doing exclusive stuff. You speak about Hotline Miami, there are other examples out there, but there still aren't the examples of established scorers really wanting to work in games. There are some that have done it. David Bowie tried working with Quantic Dream. Paul McCartney has also done some stuff every now and again. But it takes the musician to learn more about interactive music as well, because interactive music is very different to scoring a film and being able to build up the music interactively so that when a baddie is coming to you, the music does get more scary, as happens in every good horror film that you've ever seen. But that's probably a separate topic for another day, because I could talk for this about hours.
I'm going to cheat and actually add two, but they'll be both quick and light-hearted. The first one, which band most impressed you back in your AR days on the first experience with them live? And secondly, what's it like being a Watford FC man working so close to West Ham Stadium?
So on the first one, you're talking about a band that I worked with or a band I didn't work with?
Any experience you've had, first time you've ever gone to a gig and you thought that band is something I was never expecting?
I got completely blown away by a band called Mint 400, who were basically the new Pink Floyd, who we signed. and put in the studio with one of Led Zeppelin, and came out with no usable tracks at all. That was a very steep learning curve. Placebo were another band that I tried to sign. Linkin Park was completely blown away live, and was every time that I saw them. And Muse as well. It tends to be more on the rock side of things. That you just knew that there was something special. On the second side of things, I have friends who work at West Ham. I have a couple of mates who play for West Ham, and I can see their stadium from the office. Watford's chief exec and chairman used to be chief exec at West Ham, so he's not going to be coming to visit my office anytime soon. But it's going to be useful for parking for the away game next season, because it's 5 minutes walk. So yeah, I don't tend to decide where the studio is going to be based on what football stadium's there. We were very close to Arsenal's ground with our last two offices. And I did at one point think of moving us to Watford, but we would have lost 90% of the team had we done that, and I didn't really want to do that. So,
awesome. Well, that was fantastic. A round of applause for Byron and Miles.